Thanks for tuning in to Prime Sports NASCAR, Prime Sports Radio Network. The final day, the final Monday of February for this program. Prime Sports NASCAR is brought to you in part by rotowire.com. As CJ, your window is like freaking out. It's going bazoom, in and out, in, out, in. You know, you're the only one that does that, by the way. You're the only one whose video window does these like really weird. I don't know what it is with your hookup there, but it's kind of interesting. We'll fix that when I get a new computer. But anyway, it's entertaining for the audience. So
Literally not touching
yeah, let's leave it at that.
All right, great.
Yeah, and as far as entertaining, now I must say this: the first 2 weeks of the season, my picks have been close to winning, and I'm trying to, if we had this show like 5 minutes after the race yesterday, there'd be all sorts of expletives being thrown around here. But I've had time to digest everything and look at the big picture. And I might actually be representative of Ryan Blaney's camp, because I got to believe Ryan Blaney is also in that situation where he could have thrown out a lot of expletives after the last 2 weeks as well. But I'm going to look at the big picture. And we've both been very high on Ryan Blaney's talents. He was my Final Four pick this year, and I've been extremely confident about his abilities. After what I've seen now, after the first 2 weeks, I'm going to take the high road and say what we're about to witness this year is what we witnessed a few years ago with Martin Truex Jr., when it took them a little while to escape all those issues with Cole Pern, and then sooner or later they broke through, started winning races, and started to become a top team. And I believe this is the year that begins for Ryan Blaney. I don't think what we saw yesterday was a fluke. He's just too good. He's got a great crew chief now. We'll talk about the strategy in a minute about how things worked out in the race. But again, I'm going to start on a positive note and say this is the beginning of Ryan Blaney becoming a star.
Yeah, I'm completely not going to disagree with you in any sense of the imagination. I think Penske has looked very strong. One of the few teams, actually, that has looked strong both weeks so far on the super speedway and then here now on the 1.5-mile ovals. And Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano was the one that made it to victory lane, but Ryan Blaney was the one throughout the entire day. You never had a question about where he was going to be. He was constantly fighting inside the top five, making all the moves that he needed to. And then even, going back 2 weeks ago at the Daytona 500, he was drafting extremely well. He was consistently at the front. And I think were it not for Newman, unfortunately, kind of taking that line away from him and his momentum at that last little kink before you got to the finish line, I think he would have had something a little bit more and probably would have overtaken or would have stayed ahead of Denny Hamlin for that win. So he would and should have had at least one win so far at this point.
Yeah, he should actually be second and first after 2 races. Really, yep. if he has normal luck.
Agreed.
Not asking for good luck, just normal luck. He'd be second. Yeah, normal. He'd be second and first. Let's talk about the strategy now, because last year I remember a time, I don't know if it was with you or with Eric, I brought up the fact that, hey, how come the crew chiefs aren't deciding to either pit or stay out or whatever? It always seemed like what was happening over the last year or two was whatever the leading driver was doing, everyone else was doing. It wasn't like it was 4 or 5 years ago where you would be like, oh, man, that guy, that leader's in trouble. If he pits, there's going to be drivers staying out or vice versa. What we saw yesterday. So yesterday was the first time in a few years, and they talked about it. Gordon said, oh, that always happens. No, it doesn't always happen, Jeff. It happened maybe when you were driving several years ago, but it did not happen last year. It's like, oh, copycat, he comes in, we come in, he stays out, we stay out. And I'd be sitting here the next day complaining about why don't drivers take any chances. If the driver goes in, you stay out. So I got what I wanted, but I didn't want it yesterday because Ryan Blaney got screwed over it. I don't know if there was anything else Todd Gordon could have done. It's one of those decisions that obviously they're gonna think about it, but you think, okay, if he stays out and everyone else stays out, Ryan Blaney wins the race.
Yeah, and I think it would have paid off if there would have been a green, white, checkered or overtime after that. I think it was Larry McReynolds that actually said that there are just too few laps at that point. They were literally just one lap away from the finish, or I guess two, because you had to take the green, the white, and then they were done. If there had been a crash before they got to the white flag, I think that strategy, in other words, stopping and getting your tires, would have paid off, because then he would have had more time to come through the field. But as it was, 2 laps, that many cars end up staying out. Joey Logano got protected because of the cars behind him that decided to stay out and capitalize on track position as well, and that just ended up being the right call. If fewer cars had stayed out, and if there would have been one more caution prior to the finish, or the checkered flag coming out, or I guess the white flag, because they never actually made it to the checkered flag. There was a caution before. But if that overtime would have happened, I think either of those scenarios would have played out in Blaney's favor, because Logano would have been sitting out there with worn out tires, and everybody would have been coming behind him with fresh ones and would have been able to overtake him very easily.
In saying that, do you think Gordon made the right call?
Yeah, I mean, he's in a tough position. You're the first car there, so what are you going to do? Banking on what we have seen in the past, probably. I would have guessed that there would have been another crash, and there was another crash. It just happened that Logano passed the start-finish line before the yellow actually came on. He wasn't even all the way onto the back straight yet. He was still in turns one and two. So there was another crash. Had it happened just a couple of seconds before, I think it would have turned out to be the right call, and Blaney would have gotten further up, if not won the race.
By the way, Mike Joy, who's a very good broadcaster, has had a rough start to the season. Daytona 500, he didn't call the finish, and last week and then yesterday, he initially thought the race wasn't over when it was over.
Correct.
So that that confused the hell out of me. He goes, "Oh, race ain't over." It's like, really? The race ain't over? I thought it was over, but he said it ain't over, so that's good. And then all of a sudden, it's like it's over. I was like, "Oh, all right, well."
I said out loud, "What are you watching?" Yesterday. Yeah, it was a good couple hundred yards. Logano had passed, but rough outing. I don't know if they're trying to find their way without Darrell Waltrip or what have you, but it's a little bit awkward the first 2 weeks. Let's say.
Well, and we haven't talked about that. What is the deal with Darrell Waltrip?
He retired, so he was done.
Because I don't remember hearing anything about that last year. Was that one of those retirements where he made the decision in the offseason?
No, actually, they knew he was going away, and they had a special celebration thing. Everybody said goodbye.
Oh, last year, you mean?
Just because Fox was the first half. Yeah, it was probably just because Fox was the first half of the year, and it was so long ago at this point that he had said his goodbye. So.
All right. So as far as other storylines, well, DiBenedetto ends up second. And I don't really want to get too much into the drivers that benefited, including Stenhouse, with the last, with the strategies that moved them up, because they weren't anywhere near the top 10 until strategy put them up there. But DiBenedetto was kind of hanging around the top 10 most of the day. So for him to finish second, and knowing, and matter of fact, Eric talked about this on Friday with me, is when we looked at the odds, DiBenedetto was like 80-1. That Las Vegas sure hasn't caught up with the fact that this is a talented driver with new equipment. And as people that gamble on NASCAR, we hope that continues, because that's the one thing I'm frustrated about with Blaney, is that I got him at 22-1. And now Vegas will definitely catch up on the fact that he almost won the last 2 weeks. And I bet you his odds are going to be like one of the top 5 or 6 this week. And I'm not going to get anywhere near 22-1 Ryan Blaney anymore.
Yeah, you can bank on that. Matt DiBenedetto is still flying below the radar. He was in a poor, underfunded team in the years past, and we saw what he was able to do with that. So when you get him in a good car or a decent car, much better car, with that relationship with Penske Racing, and you see what he's capable of doing. I wouldn't be surprised if he has more top fives this year than he got last year. He might even be in contention to win a race here or there if things fall his direction. Who knows, if they start hitting things correctly, making the right calls, and all get on the same page, he could actually very well be a contender in certain weeks.
Were there any drivers that finished in the top 10 that kind of we should be going, oh, that's interesting? Or were most of those drivers outside of Joey Logano, as I mentioned, only really there that benefited with the late strategy moves?
Well, Jimmy Johnson, I think Jimmy Johnson was fast all weekend. He topped one of the practices. He was consistent throughout the day. Ended up pulling off a top 5 finish, which was his first, I think, since July of last year when we were at Daytona. So I think, as suspected last week and maybe the week before when he rolled off the truck at Daytona, I think this team's got something figured out. They've definitely taken a forward step from last year, and I think that we haven't heard the last of Jimmy Johnson. This may be his last season in the series, but I'm not so sure you can write him off for a win yet this year. I think he's going to be one that surprises, considering how poor his seasons have been comparatively the past few years.
All right. Meanwhile, the Toyotas had a weekend to forget. It all started with prior to the race, and because of their penalties that put them in the back to start, they didn't have practice time. They were in the back. Kyle Busch was the top Toyota at 15th. What happened?
Yeah, they were, just as you said, they rolled off the truck. All of the Joe Gibbs cars had infractions as they went through inspection, and so had to sit out. Denny Hamlin had an inspection penalty that had carried over from Daytona, so he lost even more time. They just they missed the ball completely. I'm not sure if there was something larger going on or if it was just a matter of missing out on that time. Certainly something larger, because they were working on their cars throughout the race, and they were getting better. Kyle Busch was coming forward, as was Denny Hamlin, but not nearly fast enough, not nearly what we would have seen from them in the last 3 quarters of last season. We knew Penske Racing was going to be strong. They were strong here last year, and we expected them to be strong again. They were strong at Daytona, so that wasn't a surprise. I think for whatever reason, Gibbs just lost ground on them yet again, and it's virtually a carbon copy of what we saw in 2019, in that Denny Hamlin wins, Joey Logano wins, and then Penske and Ford look to be the early dominators. But Joe Gibbs last year figured out what their problems were. They made adjustments, and they became the dominant team throughout the season. I have a feeling that that's going to happen again this year, but certainly they missed the ball within Las Vegas, and we'll see how they unload and how they race, or at least what speeds they put up in the first practice early this week in California. But if they're off again, you probably got to write them off at least for another week.
So have we learned anything at all new, whether through the drivers, the teams, the racetrack itself, the race, anything new this week compared to last week or last year?
It's very similar to last year. Again, don't write off Joe Gibbs yet. Certainly very, very early, but it looks like the Fords are the ones that are getting out of the gate the strongest, and they were very quick. Won qualifying races in Daytona, were in contention for the lead in Daytona. They pretty much dominated the running in Las Vegas. But like you said, not having a single Toyota in the top 15 last weekend or yesterday at Las Vegas is a big black mark. So Toyota's definitely got a lot of work to do. Probably from a fantasy perspective, and certainly from a wagering perspective, at a minimum, you got to wait and see how quick they go in practice this week before you end up choosing them, because the problems that they had in Las Vegas are just too big to overcome in 1 week. I don't know what they're going to do, but if they unload fast this week, definitely take a look at them. But if they're showing, kind of mid-pack speed again, bottom of the top 10, if not further out, then you probably want to.
Well, the one trend that we talked a lot about with Eric on Friday regarding the impound racing races and the fact that you want to keep an eye. You don't even care about qualifying. You don't even care about the fastest practice speeds. You want the long runs, practice numbers. And sure enough, Ryan Blaney had really good long run practice numbers and should have won the race. So And by the way, and I'll also say this, and again, I'm going to look at this in a positive way, that even though Chase Elliott had some bad luck, if Blaney has good luck at the Daytona 500, maybe he wins. If Chase Elliott has good luck this week, maybe he wins. And we do start seeing the really young, talented drivers open 2020 with wins. So I'm gonna hope that that is what we are going to see, because sure, people talked a little bit about Chase Elliott this week, but he was 15-1. He was not supposed to be as dominant as he was, because he was the driver to beat until his tire went down.
Yeah, and that's another thing I think we can write off now. There've been a lot of speculation about how the new Chevrolet body is going to work and whether it's going to take the team some time to adjust. Hendrick's got it. All the Chevrolet teams have got it. So this body, this new slightly less angular nose on the Chevrolets, I think is playing to their favor. They're definitely coming out of the gate swinging. And like you said, if Chase Elliott had a little bit better luck, didn't have the trouble that he wound up in, he was on his way to doing a clean sweep of the race and could have walked away with a win.
And do you look at that as just bad luck? Did Chase do anything wrong?
No, I didn't see anything that he necessarily could have done differently. I mean, he was arguably the fastest car through much of the race. I mean, Kevin Harvick was quick on restarts and everything, but after a couple laps bedded in, it was Logano and Blaney and Elliott that were coming and eating him up. And Elliott, Truex might have been the only one that could have held a candle, at least in the early stages, to any of them. But he had his own problems. So no, I don't see anything necessarily that Chase Elliott should have done differently or could have done differently. But I would definitely expect him to get a win.
Kyle Busch is 27th in the standings, but we don't worry about that. Do we worry about Kurt Busch?
No, I think he kind of comes in fits and starts. It's not like he was completely off the game. He was just relatively quiet. And I think there are tracks that suit him a little bit better than others. I think coming to Phoenix, that'll probably be a better spot for him. He's just not getting out. He didn't have the same advantage, I guess, Kyle Larson had maybe in getting up a little bit further into the track position. So maybe he's got to work on his car a little bit in the dirty air. But I think he's more kind of an up and down, and we'll see him certainly at some other tracks and not have any concerns about where he's been. Certainly at the restrictor plate tracks and then some of the other ones as well. I think Phoenix will be a little bit better.
All right, what's up the latest with Ryan Newman? Any news on when we can expect him to race again?
No news as far as a return. He did disclose that he received a head injury in that crash, which is no surprise. I think the bigger surprise is that he didn't have any.
That he still had a head left was the big surprise.
He still had a head left was the big surprise. Absolutely, yeah. So certainly when you get an impact like that in your head area, you're going to have a concussion or something. So they're going to want to make sure that they take their time with that. It was a heavy hit, and I don't know, no speculation in terms of symptoms or what might be. But he did say it was a head injury, so they're definitely going to take their time with that. They'll put him through the normal protocol like Dale Earnhardt Jr. did for a couple of years ago in order to get back into the car, and then hopefully once everything settles down for him, he'll be all right and be able to be back to normal. But as of now, no time frame for his.
Okay, now let's take an early look ahead at the Auto Club 400. Eric and I will give a final preview with all of our picks on Friday's show. And Kyle Busch won for the third time this race last year. That ties a all-time best for drivers winning at Fontana. So Kyle won all three stages. Boy, that must have been an exciting race. I'm sure we were all thrilled watching that one. Ford, though, finished second through fifth. All three Penske drivers were in that top five, along with Kevin Harvick, but Kyle won the race and dominated in what I am sure was a boring, dominating win.
Yeah, I think we're going to see something similar. Hopefully not as boring and dominating, but I think we're going to see something similar in terms of the finishing order. Penske just looks really strong. Ford overall looks really strong, so I can see those three Penske guys being in the top five again. Kevin Harvick looking quick as well both weeks so far. And then, this will probably be a better week for Kurt Busch. He finished sixth in this race last year. But I do think the one Toyota to look out for, aside from Kyle Busch, because you always got to look at Kyle Busch, but I think the one Toyota to look out for early is certainly going to be Martin Truex Jr. He was quick despite the issues that the rest of his team faced last week, and understanding he's got that new crew chief and they're trying to get on the same page and figure out how to work with each other, but they weren't lacking for speed yesterday, so I can anticipate them being in the mix this weekend as well.
And any changes as far as the track? Is this one of the changes as far as the packages, or this is going to be the same setup?
This will be the same setup. So it's 200 laps. We had, these races aren't usually that boring.
Okay.
For whatever reason, Kyle Busch here in Michigan usually tend to, actually in recent seasons, have gotten significantly better. Really high speeds coming into these turns, the long straightaways, that long arcing front stretch. So horsepower is going to make a difference here. And with the extra drag that these guys got, punching a bigger hole in the air, they're going to be able to draft up quicker. So it should bunch things up a little bit better. Should see some good racing throughout the field. Hopefully we just don't have somebody that gets out front and creates a wake that nobody else can get through for the
How's
lead.
everything going on at rotowire.com?
Everything's going well. We'll have our DraftKings or fantasy preview up after qualifying. Qualifying is going to be on Saturday this week, and then we'll have the race recap probably late Sunday night, first thing Monday morning.
I'm Greg DePalma. That's the incredible shrinking man on video, CJ Radun. Hopefully we'll have that fixed up in the next few weeks. But CJ, appreciate it as always. Enjoy the race. Hopefully it's a lot more exciting than last year's. And we'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. Sounds good. Thanks.